Oh, sorry. Have to get used to turning the mics on here as opposed to the State Office Building. I will call the meeting of the Committee of the Judiciary, Finance, and Civil Law Committee to order. Everybody is seated and happy to be here, right? What I thought we'd do this morning is just preliminary stuff, just introducing members, and then nonpartisan staff is they're seated at the testifiers table, and they are going to cover like their areas of research and expertise that they do for this committee. I'm very happy to have you all here. And we do have one member, Representative Bliss he had a spur of the moment meeting, I believe, with the governor today. So I guess we'll let him go today since he has that meeting. But what I thought we'd do first is we're just going to kind of go around the table and introduce ourselves. And I think our researcher just stepped out, so maybe I will tell you that our researcher that will be sitting over at this table, that's Erin Bursey. She has long blonde hair, so that's who that will be. And we'll go ahead.
Marissa Mantefeld, Committee Administrator.
Liam Edgar, Committee Legislative Assistant.
Representative Walter Hudson, District 30A.
Representative Bedell Duran, 2A.
Representative Marion Rarick, 29B.
Elliot Engen, 36A, Lionel Lake, Centerville, Circle Pines, White Bear Township, and North Oaks.
Terry Steer, District 22B.
I'm Nathan Hopkins. I'm a nonpartisan legislative analyst with the House Research Department.
John Walls, House Fiscal Staff.
Ben Johnson. I'm also with the House Research Department.
And I guess I didn't introduce myself, but I'm Peggy Scott, and I represent 31B, which is kind of northern Anoka County. So thank you all for being here. We're going to jump right in. The first testifier I have on my list is Mr. Walls. So if you want to go ahead with your presentation, that'd be great. Thanks.
Good morning, Madam Chair and members. There are two just very small handouts in your packet, and I'm going to be walking through those today. As I said before, my name is John Walls. I'm with the House Fiscal Staff, so you would, for new members, you would come to me if you had questions about money or the budget or getting a fiscal note. And for now, I'm just going to walk through the accounts that are under the jurisdiction of this committee. And the first page that I'm going to go through looks like this. This is what the committee spreadsheet will look like. We have 12 different accounts on the spreadsheet. There is one that is sort of up as a jurisdictional issue. It could be on the spreadsheet in the future, and that is the Cannabis Expungement Board. There was sort of a little question as to whether that would be in, here, in this committee or public safety. But just beginning at the top, the Supreme Court is our first agency under our jurisdiction. You can see the way to read these spreadsheets is the top line will be the base for the agency. So as you can see, we're going into fiscal year 26. We're going to start budgeting for fiscal 26 and 27. And so the Supreme Court has a base budget of $49,064,000. In the future, there will be decision items that will be items from the governor's budget or members' bills that will appear under there and that will total to the bottom for what this committee puts forth as a suggestion to pass as a new budget. So below the Supreme Court is the Board of Civil Legal Aid. They have a base of $34,167,000. They're sort of a new entity this year. They had been part of the Supreme Court, or at least a pass-through of the Supreme Court, but they were put in statute to be their own sort of state agency, and so now they appear separately. Next, we have the Court of Appeals on line 20. They have a base of $15,259,000, followed by the district courts. This is the largest item in our budget. The district courts have a base of $384 million per year. Then the Guardian Ad Litem Board, $25,620,000 per year. The tax court, $2.271 million. On the back side of the page, the Uniform Laws Commission, $115,000 base. The Board of Judicial Standards, $645,000. Then we have the Board of Public Defense, $164 million per year. The Human Rights Commission, $8,889,000 per year. Then we have two newer agencies, the Office of Appellate Counsel and Training, $1.56 million per year, and the Competency Restoration Board at $10.9 million per year. And you can see the base for judiciary finance as we go into this biennium is $696.9 million on an annual basis. Madam Chair, that just brings me to what a fiscal note looks like, and for many of you, this will sort of be repeat information, but for new members, if you have a bill that may have a cost, during bill introductions, I monitor bill introductions and bills that are referred to this committee. If it looks like it will have a cost, I will request a fiscal note for it. Those take about 2 weeks, and we will try to get those in time for committee. So if your bill has a cost, the committee knows what that is estimated to be. If you have any question about a bill that you think might need a fiscal note, feel free to send me an email or talk to me after committee, or ask the CA to contact me and I will get one for you. There are sometimes when a bill is not going to be scheduled, a member might want a fiscal note anyway, and you are entitled to one, so just be sure to request one and I will get one for you. So the fiscal note looks like this. This is a very simple one from last year. It was requested by the previous chair. You can see the author was Jamie Becker Finn. There's a little table on the top right. It will very quickly tell you whether or not there's a change in expenditures, fees, tax revenue, information technology, or if it has a local fiscal impact. So that's just a very quick way to see what the impact will be. This is a simple fiscal note. The bill was to get rid of fees for uncertified copies in in civil cases. That is on page 2 under bill description, is describing what the bill does. But going back to the first page, the table gives you the total of what the cost of the bill is. In this case, it was a loss of revenue because it was getting rid of the fee. So you see a loss of revenue of $265,000 in the first year and $284,000 every year after that. It will tell you the fund that the cost is to, or the increased revenue is to, or what have you. And this is just a simple fiscal note that involved one agency. If we have what's called a consolidated fiscal note, let's say someone had a bill to require every state employee to get a tetanus shot. There would be the total cost for that on the first page, and then every agency would have a summary after that, so there would be different page or pages for each agency giving their individual costs that would all total to the first page. This bill did pass, and so it appeared as a decision item on the spreadsheet, and that's basically sort of an oversimplification of things you'll see as we go through the budget process. Madam Chair, that's the end of my time unless there are any questions.
Madam Chair and members, my name is Nathan Hopkins with the House Research Department. I staff this committee along with Ben Johnson and Mary Davis. Mary couldn't be here today, but I'm going to talk about some aspects of the committee's jurisdiction. Ben and Mary and I tend to coordinate and split things up as they come through this committee. If you have any questions, you can feel free to email all three of us, and we'll coordinate with each other to see who's best suited to get you your answer. So you don't have to worry about who exactly does what. Feel free to email all three of us if you have any questions. So the first thing I'm going to talk about is sort of the committee's general civil law jurisdiction, what civil law is, and then I'm going to talk about government data practices and then turn it over to Ben. So civil law, in a general sense, is anything in the law that isn't criminal law. So this would include property law issues, real estate and sales, torts, So anything dealing with liability, people's rights and duties to each other. This could include like medical malpractice or personal injury law, contract law, civil rights law, also consumer protection and employment law issues. It includes family law, issues like divorce, child custody, child support, adoption and surrogacy, and many other areas. Legislation related to the civil law area, it can center around a number of different issues, but one thing that the legislature typically looks at are what remedies are available to people through the courts. And so this could include whether or not a person has a right to bring a lawsuit and under what circumstances, what the statute of limitations is for that lawsuit, how long someone can wait before they can bring their lawsuit, other kinds of limitations on liabilities or immunities for people, the right not to be sued or an immunity from suit. It could include changes to what damages are available to someone who prevails in a lawsuit, how much money they can get, whether it's limited or not, the apportionment of those damages among various liable defendants, if there's more than one of them, whether punitive damages are available, damages over and above damages, that, money that's simply meant to compensate someone for their injury, whether or not a prevailing plaintiff or defendant even could get attorney's fees paid for by the opposing party in the case is another issue. What the burden of proof is in the case, whether it's preponderance of the evidence or beyond a reasonable doubt, those kinds of standards of proof. Also, notice and due process, how parties will learn about various aspects of the case, service of process when litigation begins, and those kinds of more procedural issues. Also, Attorney General enforcement, typically any bill that deals with Attorney General enforcement, Attorney General typically enforces things through civil legal actions, so AG enforcement typically finds its way through this committee. So this committee does have a very broad jurisdiction, and one of the reasons it ends up usually hearing a lot of bills is because many bills get re-referred to this committee because they have attached to them some kind of private right of action, Attorney General enforcement, something affecting parties' legal rights and their ability to enforce those rights in court. So unless there are any questions about the sort of general civil law aspect, I'll move on and talk to data practices.
Mr. Hopkins, go ahead, and then we'll reserve questions after you're completely finished.
Okay. So this committee also deals with matters related to government data practices. The Minnesota Government Data Practices Act is codified at Chapter 13 of Minnesota statutes, and this affects all information that's held by all government entities in Minnesota, so state agencies as well as local governments, counties, et cetera. There are really two aspects to government data practices. There's the transparency aspect and the privacy aspect. The transparency aspect deals with how the government deals with public information, how that information can be requested by members of the public, what's available to them, how much does it cost to see it, how easy is it to find out about this information, and what the kind of timelines are for getting information that you request. So there's the transparency aspect that's part of Chapter 13. And then there's the privacy aspect of Chapter 13. So Chapter 13 will classify certain kinds of data that government entities collect about citizens as, it can classify it as private or confidential. There are several different kinds of protected classifications that Chapter 13 can give to government information to keep it from being publicly available. And one of the main issues that legislation is often focused on when it comes to private information is how it can be used and shared by government entities. Because once data is private, it's protected, it's more locked down, and government entities need specific legislative authority to transfer it between different government entities or release it for any sort of purpose. So that's often a focus of legislation dealing with government data practices. One very interesting feature of this committee is that there's a mandatory referral rule for any bill dealing with government data practices. Any bill that substantially affects government data practices is supposed to be re-referred to this committee. So similarly to the civil law issue, where we get a lot of re-referrals to this committee about bills that aren't primarily about civil law or aren't primarily about government data practices. If someone establishes a new program administered by the Department of Health and it involves the collection of data, typically that data will have some kind of classification under Chapter 13, which means the bill will be re-referred to this committee. And the chair of the committee will typically have the authority to say whether or not this is a bill that substantially affects government data practices and therefore needs to be re-referred to this committee. Sometimes a bill might mention Chapter 13 or mention government data practices, but it doesn't make a significant change to the law and therefore doesn't need to be heard by the committee. But that's up to the chair to decide what does and doesn't fall under the umbrella of the mandatory referral rule for government data practices. In the past, sometimes the committee has been interested in privacy issues more generally beyond Chapter 13. Chapter 13, of course, only affects government entities and the data that they collect, but a lot of privacy issues deal with private actors, especially in the sort of technology, big tech sector. So this committee's interest and jurisdiction can vary when it comes to privacy. Oftentimes, the Commerce Committee will also hear a lot of these bills that are sort of privacy protective because they are more of a consumer protection type of issue. But the committee could also take an active interest in privacy issues and hear those bills as well. Madam Chair, unless there are any other questions, Ben Johnson will discuss the rest of the committee's jurisdiction.
Thank you. We will see a lot of stuff here, especially towards the end of deadlines and stuff. Things will be flowing into this committee. And but as you can imagine with technology and all the concerns with that these days, this could be something, and there is a data practices, a legislative commission on data practices, and it hasn't met for several years, but that needs to be reinstituted because there could be a committee just on doing all the stuff related to technology, whether that's in the private sector, whether that's what law enforcement uses or whatever the case may be. We've heard a lot, especially on the East Coast, and then I saw, I think, a blip the other day about drones, right? And so we worked on drone legislation a few years ago. And traditionally, this data stuff has been fairly bipartisan. It's been less so in the last few years. But a lot of the good policies that we have put in place, whether that's body cameras, license plate readers, drones, whatever it is, that's been largely worked on with all stakeholders. And it's been a very bipartisan effort. And what I found, because I worked on some of those issues, is nobody gets everything they want. But that tends to be usually the right balance. But that is an issue that, as nonpartisan staff knows, that I care a lot about, and it makes some strange bedfellows sometimes, where you might have some super conservatives agreeing with the ACLU, for instance, on some privacy issues. So it's, I hope that we will approach that in a spirit of nonpartisanship, because I think or bipartisanship, because I think it affects all of our constituents. And so I appreciate Mr. Hopkins. That was a very good overview and really got onto the pulse of what this committee's work has been. So thank you. Mr. Johnson, go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, members, again, it's Ben Johnson. I'm with House Research. I staff the Public Safety Committee as well as this committee. And in this committee, I primarily handle the appropriation portions. As you know, this is a budget year, and one of the big tasks that this committee will have is putting together a budget bill that funds those various entities that Mr. Walls walked through at the beginning. So as you get to that stage of things, I will be the one who does most of the drafting for the appropriations and any specific riders related to those appropriations. I also cover the various policy provisions related to those entities that are kind of court related, if you will. So to the extent that this committee deals with the sort of practice and procedures of the judicial branch. That falls to me. There are separation of powers issues with that, which I won't get into at this point, but there are limits on what the legislature can tell the courts to do. But there are certain things that are in statute. For example, the number of judges in the state is a thing that's in statute. And so if there's an increase or a decrease in the number of judges in the state, the legislature does that, and that goes into statute. And then if there are policy changes to those other sort of court-related practitioners, the Board of Public Defense, guardians ad litem, the Civil Legal Aid Board, that new Office of Appellate Counsel and Training, or the Competency Restoration Board, those sorts of entities. If there are changes to the policy provisions, those are the sort of things that I typically handle in this committee. And then as Mr. Hopkins indicated, both Ms. Davis and Mr. Hopkins and myself, I should say all three of us, sometimes coordinate our schedules so that we don't always all three have to be here at the same time. And since a lot of what I handle is the budget stuff, you may not see my face as regularly for the first half or so of the committee hearings, and then I'll be here more regularly toward the end when the focus typically shifts to the budget provisions. Madam Chair, I think that's all that we had prepared for today.
Thank you, Mr. Johnson. And Mr. Hopkins, were you prepared to do, I know Mary Davis is out with a sick child. Were you prepared to cover kind of what she covers, or do we need to wait and have her come in another time? Or?
Madam Chair, so she and I basically split that civil law jurisdiction that I opened up with. Mary does focus especially on family law. If you have family law issues, Mary Davis is the person to reach out to primarily. Also real estate issues are primarily Mary's wheelhouse. But like I said earlier, don't worry about who exactly you have to email. Feel free to email all three of us, or just me, or just Ben, or just Mary, and we'll figure it out and get you your answer as quickly as possible.
Thank you, Mr. Hopkins, and thank you for that. Representative O'Neill, you have a question?
Yep, Representative Rarick has a question.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
That's okay. It's a change for all of us.
Apologies.
No, and I'm very happy to be back on this committee with you, Madam Chair. And I remember back when you chaired before, and we were together on this committee. So I'm very happy to be here. But as I was looking through kind of the jurisdictions, the Competency Restoration Board, I'm not really clear, and I'm wondering if they could just kind of tell the committee its function and why it's in this jurisdiction.
Okay. Mr. Johnson?
Madam Chair, Representative Rarick, members, the Competency Restoration Board has a long history, and I'll try to keep it short, but the shortest version is that there are individuals who are charged with crimes who are determined to not be mentally able to understand what's going on in those proceedings. Historically, that's been dealt with through court rules. It was rules 20.01 and 20.02, and you'll hear a lot of people talk about Rule 20 evaluations in the criminal proceedings. If somebody was found to be not competent, there were pretty limited options for dealing with those individuals, and many of those individuals ended up staying in jails for extended periods of time. And I think I can say that nobody thought that was the right answer. The counties didn't want to be housing those people. The defense attorneys didn't think that the people belonged there. The prosecutors had limited options for dealing with for finding other ways to deal with it. There was a large group that came together a few years ago that established this new competency attainment board. And the goal of the board is to kind of create new procedures to try to find better placements and different ways of returning those individuals to competency. It is a large and complicated, frankly, piece of legislation that passed 3 years ago. I believe it was 2022, if my memory serves. And that board is still kind of getting up to speed at this point. But what the board's basically tasked with doing is helping to coordinate things statewide. They do have individuals that they are supposed to hire who are providing essentially like case management services to people who are found to be not competent, to help find appropriate placements for them or find appropriate services for those people if they do continue to be in jail. The goal being to restore those individuals to competency so that the criminal proceedings can go forward. This is not This is not an alternative long-term placement for people with severe mental illness. That would be a separate civil commitment process. This is purely focused on that competency provision and determining if somebody can be restored to competency. If so, getting them connected to the right services to get that competency restored.
Representative O'Neill. I did it again. Representative Rarick.
It's okay, Madam Chair. We go back very far, and
You can slap me later.
I was O'Neill for a very long time. I appreciate you saying that, Mr. Johnson. Thank you for that. I had, it has to be 15 years ago or so. It was then Senator Ortman was working on something to make sure that no longer than 3 days was somebody sitting in jail, and they had to move along if they had a mental health issue. Of course, 14, 15 years later, we're still at that same place. And so I was curious as to the functionality of the Competency Restoration Board. And it certainly is incredibly impactful when we're talking about restoring somebody to competency so that they can face the consequences of what they've done. Obviously, they're in the courts. So let me ask you one final question. I know we have lots of time, but I was just curious. It looks like the prior year we had $14.4 million. Do you know, and I apologize if you don't know off the top of your head, but do you know about how many employees or how many FTEs that is in the Competency Board?
Mr. Walls.
Representative Rarick, that would be in any older prepared fiscal note, and I could get that information to you. I don't have it off the top of my head.
Thank you. Any other member questions? Very good. Well, just so the committee knows, these fellas and Mary Davis are really good at what they do, and they're so accommodating. I'm so thankful for each of you, and please don't hesitate if you have answers to go to them. They know their stuff, and they make what we do here easier, and it makes us look good, way smarter than what we are. So thank you, gentlemen, for being here, and please give my best to Ms. Davis, who's home with a sick child. So I want to bring your attention. I passed out, you should all have the Law School for Legislators flyer. And I don't think we have any attorneys on our team here. Our researcher is an attorney, so she might be interested in some free CLEs. But the Institute for Justice, or Minnesota Association of Justice now, puts this on. As you can see, we're going to have they put together a really good agenda this year. We're going to have the Chief Justice. We're going to have Andy Lugar. And I can't read that one. That's way too fine a font. What's that? What? Professor Stevenson. Is that what you said? Yeah. So it's going to be good. We're going to be Lugar's going to be talking about fraud, which will be really insightful, I think. It's always good to hear from the Chief Justice. And so I really appreciate all the work that's gone into putting this together. And so if you have, it's going to be by Zoom. So if you're home on the 7th and 14th, it's a really good time just to chime in. And my understanding is they're going to be sending everybody emails because obviously there's a link there to register. And so I encourage participation in that. I think it's going to be a really good show this year. So with that, if there's no further business of this committee, it is adjourned.